And that's really cool. We're talking to Josh, who is talking to us from Kansas. Josh, you are live on Truth Wanted. What's going on?
How's it going? Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, I appreciate it, John. Thanks for calling. Not John, Josh. That's very similar names. Yeah, what do you want to talk to us about?
Yeah, I was interested in your guys' position. I think so. Not atheist, but agnostic. Is that correct? Is that
like us?
Like would you describe yourselves as atheists?
Yeah, I would say I'm an atheist. But I mean, if we're going down the colloquial use of the word agnostic as a stepping stone, I steer clear of that, because atheism and agnosticism are kind of not related, but cousins, and they're two separate things.
Right.
It's, do I know that there is or isn't a God? Do I believe in a God? No. Atheist.
Yeah, I prefer the term atheist. There's a whole reason why I do that, and it's a whole spiel. For most people, I'm comfortable with the label of atheist. Yeah.
Awesome. And so, yeah, I was interested in talking to you guys about just kind of evaluating which worldview is more likely and which explains the totality of reality better, atheism versus theism.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, obviously, I think I don't think theism has explanations for really much of anything, particularly Christianity, right? I don't think its explanations for things make sense. I don't think it comports with our observations. And again, I'm talking about common understandings of Christianity, which is separate from theism, which was what you're specifically asking about. But I don't think like general theism or even deism really has a lot of explanatory power either, which is also why John was bringing up the whole agnostic versus atheist thing, because by some people's definitions, we are agnostic. One common thing is saying agnostic atheist, because we don't tend to necessarily say God isn't absolutely real. It's just, it's not something that we have an active belief in. And again, there's nuances to that position and how that's understood. But in general, yeah, I don't find theist positions very convincing. What about you, John?
Yeah, I'm in the same boat. And which one's more likely for me? Atheism, because I'm not convinced. That's, if that's what the conversation's about. But I mean, I feel like both Dan and I would love to hear, if you are a believer, what it is that convinces you, and that might then, sway us one way or another.
Right.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so where I'm coming from is I kind of think of it, well, I start with the very beginning of recorded history and then just kind of evaluate the great thinkers throughout history from the beginning of time all the way up through to the modern era. And for thousands of years, the greatest scholars and thinkers in history have always been some form of realist, right? Or theist or polytheist, right? And so, basically, at some point, very, very recently, someone had to decide that this realism and theism was no longer up to par, and so they had to overthrow that. And that really appeals to me coming from that perspective, because I was born into theism, and so it resonates with me, that idea where, for me personally at least, I have to overcome my theism and belief in God to take on any other opposing position like atheism or agnosticism. And so what I have to do is I have to consider, okay, what position has more explanatory power while being more simple, right? Occam's razor and whatnot. And I evaluate atheism and the materialism and nominalism that typically comes with that. And I realize I can't explain the origin of the universe. I can't explain subjective experience or how consciousness arises from neural activity, for example. And I'll just leave it at that for now. There's a lot of other really difficult problems to overcome, because I've tried on these worldviews to the best of my ability, because truth ultimately is what I'm after. Obviously, that's what we should all be after. But yeah, it's failed to overcome so many of these sorts of problems that, and the theism, specifically Christian metaphysical realism, I'll put it that way, has been, for me at least, a much more satisfactory position or worldview when it comes to explanatory power and simplicity as well.
Can I ask why Christian in particular?
Why Christian in particular?
Yeah.
Well, there's a number of reasons. There's a number of reasons. Just to throw one out there, I think it solves one of the most fundamental and difficult philosophical problems out there, the problem of the one and the many. It solves that exceptionally well, more than any other position I've discovered. The problem of universals as well. Obviously, it solves a number of problems, and there are other positions. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying Christianity is the only one to solve a number of these difficult issues, but our problems. But yeah, just to name a few, that my ancestors. I mean, it was handed down to me. This is the tradition that I was born into, and I know that plays a significant role as well.
Yeah. No, Josh, sorry, I want to get you. I know you're excited to talk to Josh as well, John.
Yes.
No, I appreciate your thoughtful response. I'll be real quick. I'm gonna do 30, 45 seconds, John, and then you jump in, okay? Because it sounds like you had a question. Because I think I would definitely meet you in the middle on some of this here. I mean, yes, you're right. Some of the greatest thinkers of history definitely believed in God. Isaac Newton, Blaise Pascal, incredible people who had a lot of contributions, had beliefs in God. I can't argue with that there. And I think that's an interesting
Aristotle.
Well, Aristotle didn't believe in Christian God, but he had God belief, sure.
Right.
Yeah, definitely theist there. So yeah, we can debate the merits of whether that matters or not. But it's hard for me to have a view of reality based on a historical consensus like that, because I think if you looked at the individual thoughts of a lot of these thinkers, like Aristotle, for example, did not think of the same gods in the same way that Isaac Newton did or Blaise Pascal did even, right? So I think there's some differences there, as well as like I think where we might disagree is that I agree that Christianity attempts to provide explanations for some of the questions that you've brought up, and I don't find them to be sufficient answers. I think that's where you're going to lose John and I, because it's hard for us to find them as acceptable. But anyway, John, you're ready to go. You take this. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that yes, there were great thinkers that believed in certain things, but what about modern great thinkers who don't believe in these things, who have equally as much to say about how things came to be?
Right.
A big fan of mine who I have a massive man crush on is Professor Brian Cox. He is a fantastic mind, in my opinion, and I would listen to that dude all day. And he is a non-believer. Neil deGrasse Tyson, he identifies more as agnostic, but he knows about the difference between agnosticism and atheism. But that being said, you said something else about growing up. How would it have been if you had grown up in another place in the world and you didn't have answers for these things? Would you, if you were in India, for instance, and your family and your ancestors were all Hindu and they had their Hindu answers to these questions that you have, which we can touch on again in a second, do you think you would then have been a Hindu believer?
Like a Hindu metaphysicalist? Instead of a Christian one?
Right.
Yeah, it's a good question. Unfortunately, it's impossible to, I couldn't possibly know. But I would say that it would certainly be more likely that I would be a Hindu than most other religions or positions, whatever you want to call it. I would say.
But that then could change depending on where you are in the world. If you're
where you are and when you are, for sure.
Yeah, exactly. If you're in Africa, at some point, thousands of years ago, you may not have been either of those things. You could have believed in a mountain being that provided rain. I don't know what they did. But you also said something about you don't know the answers to certain questions. Let me just get this out, and then I'll let you speak again. But you said you didn't know you didn't know the answer to some of these questions. So it then made sense that what you were taught by, your parents or, teachers who also believe these things, that made the most sense. But just because you don't know the answer to something doesn't mean that people who study these areas don't know. And there are, like you mentioned, consciousness. There are tons of folks who study consciousness and have, just chemical answers to why we are and why we think and why we do all these things. And I would suggest going and finding those people before you say, I don't understand something, therefore the best explanation is a God and the God that I was taught to believe.
Yes. Right. No, I agree with that completely. I actually have done that as extensively as possible. And unfortunately, that's one of the problems with materialism, naturalism. It really just has no answer to the question, how does consciousness arise from neural activity? Like, do you have an answer for that? I mean, I haven't found
I don't. Yeah. I don't have an answer for that, but I don't take that next step to then go, so it must be because of being. I go, I don't know.
Oh, yeah.
But I'd love to find out one day, So I'm comfortable with saying, I'm not sure how this works, and I'd love to find out. And maybe one day I'll manage to get on the phone with Professor Brian Cox, and he can explain it all to me.
This is an advantage that Christianity has that atheism does not, which is a confidence in answers that we can't give. I can't confidently tell you the origins of consciousness. I can give you ideas and theories that smarter people than me have come up with and propose, and that's about the limits of it. And so that is something that the atheist, and as specifically the materialist position, as you quite aptly put it, right, has a problem with dealing and overcome. What I also know, though, is that we have been able to explain a lot, and we know more today than we did before. And if we followed the exact Christian model of the world at any point in Christian history, we would have a hard time reconciling that with what we know about modern observations of science in many different aspects. For example, the belief that people can be possessed by demons, right? That's pretty clear in the Bible. I think it's pretty clear in Christian history that this is a thing that happens, and yet we have never, ever been able to actually see that, right? Like, that, and this is one particular Christian claim. But I find this to be one of many claims that Christianity makes about how the observable world works that kind of fails to fall into fruition, which gives me that skepticism towards Christianity in particular as having any reasonable explanations for even bigger questions like why we're all here and, what's going on, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's good. So things like demon possession, I find this very fascinating because I think that most people, including many, if not most, let's say Bible Belt, evangelical sorts of Christians, I think they have this kind of Marvel Universe cinematic sort of idea of demons and angels flying around with wings in some alternate reality or something like that, and demons with pitchforks and horns or whatever. That is not, I would argue that that's not what those agencies are. So metaphysically, we can explain that much better than this that belief. It flies in the face of science and everything that we know to be true today. But
doesn't that kind of, and sorry to interrupt you, Josh.
My question.
Oh, go ahead if you had a question.
Well, yeah, I just really quick. I was, I think that you can justify a proper metaphysical understanding of these agencies, right? But
demonic agencies?
I'm curious, like if it, yes. So as far as like universal principles go, and I think So for you guys, I would suspect that these universal principles, like we all agree that universal principles exist. Everybody does, but whether or not they're real.
I'm not sure. I'm gonna have to stop you there because I don't know what that means.
No, I'm confused on that as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So
But before we get into that, I kind of want to challenge you on this actually, because like you said people have a Marvel movie understanding of like demons and stuff, but I'm just talking about what the Bible says.
Yeah.
Like there's a story of Jesus taking demons, possessing people and putting them into pigs, and then having those pigs killing themselves by running off into some water, right? Like this is just a literal text, right? And like that's not the only instance of spiritual forces working in the world. We don't have there's no universal principles that need to talk that are even mentioned in stories like this, right? This is again just one of many claims of the history that Christianity makes that I just have trouble with, right?
Right. No, I get that completely. Like, so there are multiple ideas here.
Are you walking off to get a Bible?
Josh, what happened? Where are you going? Show's happening over here, bud.
Sorry, no, my wife just came home. I had to let her in. Yes, so demons.
No, we need to leave your wife outside next time. I'm just kidding. Don't do that. Don't do that. You should let her in. Oh man.
So one
there he goes. He's off.
It's gonna make his wife a cup of tea.
Yeah, Josh, if you gotta take care of something with your family, that's cool, but we are live right now, so just FYI.
Yeah. Sorry guys. I thought my voice was going through to the headphones and I walked away.
No,
good.
So, anyways, these demonic agencies, one possible explanation for this is that these are allegorical stories, right? So these are allegories. These are not necessarily literal demon possessions and Jesus like somehow taking these demons and throwing them into swine and casting them into the ocean. So
is that what you believe, Josh?
I do, yes. But
okay.
I also tend to believe that a lot of the Bible is literal as well. Right. I do believe that those stories are allegorical and point to higher truths. But
can I just jump in? I have a question
John,
about that because I'm
Take
not
it.
a believer in the Bible. I've never really read the Bible. I've read parts of it. How do you then, Josh, know the difference between a part of the Bible that is literal and a part that is like just a story? How do you tell the difference?
How do you tell the difference?
Yeah.
Sorry, guys, I'm walking outside here. Kind of loud. Okay, so the difference between how do you tell the difference between an allegorical story and a literal? Well,
how do you tell the difference? I don't want to know like how I would. I want to know how you know that this part of the Bible is a true part.
I refer to reason, tradition, and well, those are the primary ones. So you have to apply logic to it, like anything, and for me in particular, the tradition. So what specific figures in history said, because they've earned my trust. I tend to default to them to a certain degree, at least, as well.
Okay, but on that note, like the Catholic Church does demon. Like the Exorcist is a thing, like as a movie, because exorcisms happen. Like they developed the practice of exorcisms. They weren't metaphorically getting demons out of people. I think it was a very literal belief for most of Christianity, right? I think what happens, and this is a problem that I have with Christianity, Josh, is that there's a post hoc rationalization that sometimes comes with these stories that don't match up to our material existence, right? Now that we live in a world of cameras and, other kinds of evidence that kind of show, hey, this stuff actually doesn't happen the way that we think that it does. It's looking back, it seems like we could say, oh, well, this is a metaphor, but that wasn't the reality for like most Christians in most parts of history. It seems like this is a real thing. And this is true for other truth claims about the Bible as well, right?
Sorry to interject here. That's not true at all. Like the ancient Christians for thousands of years, I mean, literally, buddy, go. They believed in the allegorical and symbolic interpreting of the scriptures like that. That goes back to Origen, Augustine, Saint Maximus the Confessor, so on and so forth.
Sure. The Eastern Fathers, I agree. There is a meditative sort of different understanding of Christianity, but that's another problem again with Christianity is there seems to always, we live in a multiverse of Christianity. It's kind of up to individual interpretation. And this is John's sort of point. It doesn't seem like we have a reliable way of knowing what's fact and what's fiction. Because reason is not good enough, right? When you have a religion of over 1 billion people, it seems people reason differently, right?
Is reason good enough for your worldview?
Well, that's an interesting question. What do you think, John?
I mean, what is my worldview? Because I'm not sure if you know what my worldview is, and how would reason, affect it, since you know what it is that I have as a worldview.
Well, that's what I'm asking.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so one thing that's a problem with when we talk about it is that as atheists, right, we kind of present the skeptic position, and the skeptic position doesn't necessarily make the positive claim, again, that we know the answer to, say, consciousness, origin of the universe, these things like that, right? We just kind of cast doubt on the explanations that are given, right? So I don't have to have, for example, an explanation as to what really happened with demon possessions back in the day, right? I can propose a number of things, but to propose that there are actual spirits that sort of infect people's bodies, for lack of a better word, and harm people and do these things, like I don't find that to be the most reasonable, right? So some people say that this is a cop-out, but we have to be able to reject some positions as not being true, right? We can't live in a world where every interpretation is true. Otherwise, we can't really make sense of it, right? So I think we are allowed to reject things that we don't find to be plausible.
Right.
So by rejecting those positions, though, you are gaining a position. You realize that, right?
Yeah,
I don't think we are, though. I think we're just saying, no, we don't accept that, and we've opened ourselves up to a multitude of other possibilities. That's not going, it's not this, therefore it must be this, which it sounded like you were suggesting.
So your position is, I don't know anything about the world, and that's simple and has more explanatory power than.
No, I think you're putting words in our mouths, John. Josh, I sorry, I keep calling you John. I don't mean to do that.
I'm not trying to.
Yeah, no, but again, with demons, right? I could reject demon possessions and be a Hindu, right? I mean, I don't have to be an atheist to reject that position, right?
And likewise, I could be a spiritualist, which I was, and not accept demon possession.
Yeah.
Correct. Yeah. So, but the conversation is which has more explanatory power, which is more reasonable, which is more likely, theism or atheism, right?
Well, but then we're going down. Which has more explanatory power and which one is more reasonable are two very different things. Because I could explain away demon possession with absolutely anything, and does that make it reasonable? No, it doesn't. But so. Just because we're not accepting or we don't have an explanation for something doesn't mean we're unreasonable. We're just in the position of we don't know. Let's find out.
Yeah.
Well, no. I'm just just in case that was the misconception.
I got you. No. I think all I'm trying to do is figure out. Okay, for me, and for us, I suppose, since we're in this conversation. We have theism versus atheism in terms of worldviews, which is more reasonable, which has more explanatory power. And for me, trying to put on atheism and nominalism and materialism, I find it very difficult because of all the things that I've brought up, all the questions that it can't answer sufficiently. And then it sounds like your guys' position is, well, and I'm going to make sure I'm going to try to steelman this. One is that Christianity doesn't seem realistic because they believe in things like demons, and two, we don't have to take a position, and that doesn't make us unreasonable. But I just don't know how that applies to how that shows how atheism is a better position in any way.
Okay.
Or
so
agnosticism.
So I'll take this if you don't mind, John, because I think so the framing here is quite a common one in Christianity, and it's one that atheists largely reject. And it is this what we would describe as a false dichotomy between atheism and theism. And the false dichotomy is these are both explanations for things, and we need to figure out which one is the better explanation, right? So if you evaluate atheism as you might a theist position, you can see how that makes sense. But the problem is the atheist position isn't quite like theism, right? So we're not necessarily making the positive claims. It's the burden of proof doesn't fall on us to have actual explanations for all of the answers that we're trying to get, all the questions that we're asking, right? And again, this is why atheists are sometimes seen as copping out on this, because it's like, wait, what do you believe then? What do we have? And the truth is, it's going to be different based on the atheist, how one might conceive their worldview. But regardless of that fact, it's more correct to say, is Christianity true or not true? That's the question that we're more interested in, rather than is atheism true or theism true? Or, is theism the best explanation or not, right? Because again, it's a bit of a nuance there. Because I'm never going to be able to tell. I'm not going to be able to sit here and say, well, here's the whole formula for how consciousness happens. Here's the whole formula for how the universe works. I don't have that ability, and I probably never will, right? But I can evaluate something like, say, Scientology, and say, well, I don't think Scientology works for X, Y, and Z. And does that rely on presuppositions like a materialist worldview? Maybe. Right, depending on the critique. But regardless, like I said, we tend to define atheism as a rejection of a position rather than a positive. Does that make sense?
Nope. I guess he left.
Oh no, is he gone? Oh, that's too bad. It was a really good discussion.
Yeah. Yeah. It all just boils down to, are you convinced of the existence of a deity? No, yeah. I'm an atheist. It's the theists and the believers that say, oh, we know how the universe started because God did this, or we know how where the first humans came from because God did this. That's a side issue from where I stand anyway. Do I believe in a God? No, I don't. Right. I don't then have to go, oh, well, I better tell you what I believe about the beginning of the universe and what I believe about where humans go. That's not my position. I'm just seriously just not convinced that there's a being in the sky that does all this.